Stadia is making headlines across the web again, but this time it's for a very positive reason, and that's because there's rumor and speculation that very soon Stadia will be able to run Windows games on their platform. Today I'm here to run through the facts but also give you my own opinion on what exactly is going on here. There's a lot to it, so let's begin by talking about where it's originating from. Next week on March 15th, Google will be hosting a Google for Games Developer Summit, which will be a developer-focused event, but the Stadia Twitter handle has been pushing it recently. To be very clear, they've already made a comment saying that it's going to be a technical talk, but it will be something that some Stadia users may find interesting if they're following the platform and the behind-the-scenes work. One of the sessions happening at that event is the reason that there's this giant buzz about Stadia running Windows games, and that's because the session itself is described as how to write a Windows emulator for Linux from scratch. It'll be a detailed overview of the technology behind Google's solution for running unmodified Windows games on Stadia. This is a deep technical walkthrough of some of the core concepts with the goal to allow curious programmers to better understand such technologies and potentially to build their own. And that pretty much summarizes the core details that most of these sites are reporting, and there's a lot of implications about what this may lead to, but we'll talk about that later in the video. For now, let's focus on Marcin Undak, whose LinkedIn profile shows that they're the porting lead at Google Stadia and will be presenting this session. For those wondering, he's a graphics engine programmer who's had previous roles at Ubisoft and Unreal Engine, but over the past 2.5 years, he's been the porting lead at Stadia. He shared a statement about the upcoming session on LinkedIn that said the following: "I'm happy to announce that I'm going to present what I've been working on over the last 2 years at Google. If you're interested in how to write a Windows emulator for Linux from scratch, tune in on March 15th or watch later on YouTube." That pretty much implies that for almost his entire career at Google Stadia since he started, he's been working on this project that he'll be presenting at the Google for Games Developer Summit. It's clearly something that they've been working on for quite some time now. But we can still dig a little bit deeper, because under that statement was a comment from the CTO/CFO at Forge Interactive, and it was a simple exchange of saying that the link will be shared with the team over at the Forge, and Marcin thanking them, stating that he had a blast working with them on the project. So, who exactly is the Forge? Well, according to their website, they're a think tank for advanced real-time graphics offering high-quality, cutting-edge programming and consulting services. Rendering is their forte, and they can swiftly implement mainstream as well as state-of-the-art graphics techniques for their clients, of which are full of very notable names such as Magic Leap, Amazon Lumberyard, AMD, Intel, Qualcomm, IKEA, Facebook and Oculus, and Supergiant Games, among many others. Now, the Forge itself is an open source cross-platform rendering framework, and I'll be putting a link to their GitHub page down in the description below if you want to get into all of those details, but based on everything I can find about them, I wouldn't be too surprised if they played a decent role in whatever's going to be presented next week. So with all the facts and details based on what I can find about this covered, where does it leave us? Well, the truth is that we can only speculate from here on out. To get the full rundown on what exactly this all means, we're gonna have to tune into that session, and I know I'm going to myself because I'm really excited to hear what it's about. Before we start speculating or even discussing what type of impact this could have, let's make it very clear as to why this is a big deal. For those unaware, Google Stadia runs on a version of Linux. That means any game that gets developed for PC on the Windows platform does need to be ported over to work on Stadia, which means work has to be done for the game to actually be playable. Therefore, a developer or publisher who wants to bring their game over to Stadia needs to weigh whether the time investment and cost is going to be worth doing. And if I had to take a guess, it probably isn't for most AAA development. That's why Google has been rumored to be paying some of these bigger publishers a ton of money to bring their games over. To be fair to the Stadia team, they have been making strides in making development easier. There's been a huge focus on that very subject. But if what's being presented next week is what everyone's hoping for, it may get a whole lot easier to bring your games over to Stadia. And we can look at Proton as an example. That's something that Steam is really pushing with their Steam Deck. That's that newly released Valve handheld device that can play a ton of games even though it's using Linux as its OS. It's a compatibility layer that allows Windows games to run on Linux by using a modified version of Wine and a collection of high-performance graphics API implementations. And it's the very same style of project that many people are speculating that Stadia may be having in its own form. Essentially, this would make a ton of games compatible with Stadia real fast, but there is some underlying questions that we do need to ask. While it certainly would reduce the workload and upfront cost of making sure your game can run on Stadia, there are still a lot of Stadia exclusive features you would expect games to support. After all, it wouldn't suddenly be like GeForce Now where you just have to log in with your Steam info every time you launch a game. I would imagine it's also the primary reason why they've been working on this for quite some time, why it's been built in-house, and why they're not building upon Proton, which is an open source project. Not to mention, as we know, Stadia games typically have console-like options when it comes to adjusting settings. You either choose graphics or performance, or it's just permanently set. And these are just questions I can think off the top of my head. There's more than likely hundreds of more technical questions about how this would work if it does work, but until we see the session, we won't really know. And I think that's another possibility that we should probably discuss. At this point in time, most of us are going off hopes and dreams, and as much as it sounds like what we want is actually what's happening, we shouldn't try and get ahead of ourselves until we get official word on this being the case. I'm seeing a lot of people get really excited, and I'd hate for them to be disappointed. I myself am extremely excited, but we have to remind ourselves that this is pure rumor and speculation at this point in time. Nobody should take it as a guaranteed thing, because at the end of the day, we don't know how it works, we don't know how it's being implemented, and we don't know how developers or publishers are even going to react to it. But with that gloomy warning out of the way, let's now indulge ourselves and talk about the best possible case. And that's Stadia opening up the floodgates for PC ports to be brought over. The Steam Deck just launched, and it's got over 300 verified games to work perfectly fine already. Those 300 plus games have Valve's very own stamp of approval and have been confirmed to work all the way through. To be very clear, the Steam Deck has more playable games at launch than Stadia has gained over the past 3 years. Obviously, Steam already has all these games on their platform, so I wouldn't expect it to be that fast on Stadia, but the point is that this many games already are compatible with Linux due to something like Proton, and if Stadia can make its own version of that, it would lead to a ton of games getting support real fast. If the work, cost, and time is minimal that publishers have to put into making a game run on Stadia, I just don't see them saying no to more sales. I also think it's worth reminding everyone that this project started 2 years ago. If this turns out to be everything we've wanted, it would show that the Stadia team really did have a lot of forethought in making this work early on. They very well may have realized that porting was a significant problem on Stadia, and running on Linux was a barrier that most publishers and developers didn't want to cross without being paid up front. I think at the end of the day, the Stadia team is still going to want to do some significant curation when it comes to allowing games on Stadia. They do want that console-like experience in terms of playability just being very convenient, and I don't blame them for that. But to say the least, this is probably the biggest piece of news that's actually reignited my excitement for the Stadia platform in a good while. I'm trying to make sure I maintain a realistic perspective and I keep my expectations low, but even so, this is exciting for not just the community, but the Stadia team overall. I haven't seen Stadia positive media news in such a long time, and it's great to see it happening now, especially after the crazy amount of wrong hit pieces that were made about a Business Insider article that never even said that Stadia was shutting down. If anyone in the Stadia team is watching this, I'm really rooting for you guys to pull through. And I think it's fair to say I speak for a lot of the Stadia community when I say that they're rooting for you too. And with that, we'll wrap up this video. But if you want to discuss anything in the comment section or bring up any points of your own, do so down below. I would love to read your thoughts on all this. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful at all, be sure to hit that like button as it really does help the channel out. And if you're wanting more content like this, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell as well. As always, this has been the Virtual Cloud, giving you the latest and greatest on everything cloud gaming related. And until next time, I'll catch you in the clouds.